Hey, so today we are still in 2 Samuel as we have been, but there is going to be a bit of a change. And I was thinking this a couple years ago, January 1st, my sister was getting married out in Arizona, in Tucson, Arizona. So I'd never been to Arizona before, so we flew out, went there, and the weather was pretty nice. It was awesome. It wasn't, super hot, but it was like 70. We went and we saw the cactuses. What's the cacti? Cacti, like huge national park, and went on, into the desert and saw all this stuff as we were in the south. But then we were like, well, we're all the way out in Arizona. Let's go see some other things. And I was like, yeah, we should see the Grand Canyon. And of course, that's going to be super close because we're in Arizona. It wasn't, 6 hours of driving. And so we start driving through the state, going from the south of the state to the north of the state. And the landscape changed drastically. And what was kind of desert turned into, and with the cacti, turned into just like barren nothing lands. It was just flat, and like you would then see like a trailer every 50 miles into the middle of nowhere, it felt like. And then as we got farther and farther north, started to see the mountains come upon us. And then all of a sudden, trees, pine trees. I'm like, pine trees in Arizona? It just shows you your ignorance. I'm like, there should be no pine trees in Arizona. Pine trees in Michigan, fine. Ohio, fine. Arizona, that doesn't make sense to me. But like these huge, almost like pine forest. And then as we're getting even farther north, all of a sudden there's snow in Arizona. And of course, everybody that is much more educated than me are shaking your head, well, of course. But you could see like the snow line. You could see a tree line if you've ever looked at a mountain and see like almost the transition line where like the trees start and then it even gets higher and there's nothing then up there. And so as we were going, it was just like these drastic changes as we were going north into the state. It was beautiful. We saw the Grand Canyon and these antelope canyons, which you like weave through. It was amazing. And we, had a great time. And then we had to fly back out of Phoenix. So then we had to, drive all the way south again, and you hit all these transitions once again. And that picture of these like very different geographical areas of the land, of the scenery. Really, I was thinking as I was getting ready for today's talk that I was like, yeah, this is like David. These first bunch of chapters we've went through, really kind of these first 10, has been the rise of David and seeing kind of how great David is. Today's the sobering day. Today is the I have to preach that one. And I was complaining to someone about this, and they reminded me, they're like, didn't you pick 2 Samuel? I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. But it really is a big change of how we look at David, how we see David. And like last week, the story of David and Mephibosheth, if you remember him bringing this lamed, crippled young man who was Saul's grandson, Jonathan's son, to his table to eat, to feast with him, right? That's a sermon every pastor wants to preach. It's the kindness and the mercy and grace of God. It's just awesome. The next couple weeks are the ones that you're like, when I was the youth pastor, I'd be like, nah, I don't want any of those. I'll take next month. I'll take one next month. But they're important for us to see if we're going to understand David, even God's character through all this. Like, we need to understand these things. And also, one more word on this. I was listening to this guy, a theologian, and he was speaking about his conviction at one point in his life. He said, I am not going to hide the Bible from people. He goes, for too long I was taught we need to hide parts of the Bible because it's too challenging, it's too tough. People might lose their faith, people might walk away. I don't want to have to deal with this or whatnot. He says, if God put it in there, and I really believe he did, then I'm not going to hide it from God's people. Okay, so that's where we're at. So, chapter 11 is where we're starting through. We're going to try to get through 2 chapters. Hopefully, I'm not going to speak forever, but we're going to get through this. Okay, chapter 11. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. So we're getting the setting of what's taking place. This is probably in the springtime when kings go out to war. There are certain times that you'd go out to war, right? Just actually, even in today's day and age, well, maybe in years past, there's times where you're like, yeah, it's too cold, or this is not the right time to actually go and fight. We're going to wait for a certain time. This is what's going on. This is the normal time. Maybe kings would go out to war. And people make a big deal out of this as we proceed. If you know the story coming up, probably many of you do, of David and Bathsheba. There will be a big emphasis on that David. This is like setting up that David did something wrong, like he was being lazy, or the idea of what's the phrase? Idle hands are the devil's playground or toys or something along those lines. Have you heard this before? And so it's like, hey, David wasn't going out and doing his battle, and so now what's going to come is really coming out of his laziness or his just staying home. I think, at least for me, that is such a far stretch of what this passage is saying. And even if you go, hey, David has been this warrior this entire time, and he has a commanding officer who has been going out to battle, he's not needing to go out into every battle. I think it's setting the stage for what happens, not necessarily that David is somehow wrong in this. So David's home, but his soldiers are definitely out of town. They're gone. His army is gone because they're out fighting. Verse 2, one evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Okay, let's think in your mind again. David has, remember, built this palace of cedar, this big house. It was so big and so grand, he wanted to build a house for God. If you remember that from a couple weeks ago, God says, nope, you're not doing that for me yet. Your son will do this one day, but I don't need you to build me this house. He has this great house, this palace, this probably floored building, and he goes out kind of in the evening, gets out of bed, walks around. You could think if it's hot. We just had a big argument on what's the right temperature to set your house in our little pre-meeting here, and what temperature you sleep at. And some of, if you sleep in anything above 65, that's crazy. Just so you know, that's my personal opinion. See, some of you are, yep. And so it says David gets out of bed, so he gets out of bed, he's walking around the roof. This palace is probably very tall and also at kind of the highest point in the city. And so he's looking down and he sees this woman bathing on the roof. There are, again, times where people will say Bathsheba is somehow exposing herself or asking for it or all of these type of things. Again, I don't think it's very hard to read that into the text. I think that tries to dismiss David and his own actions and like, hey, let's make them both problems, like that she was doing something. I would go very hard to read that into that's a natural thing. Hey, I'm going to be bathing on the roof. This isn't foreign or like, hey, I'm going to open the windows and let everybody see. That's not really what's happening. Instead, David's at a point that, hey, I can see. So he sees her, and it says that he sends someone to find out about her. We lose a little in translation here. The first word is that, like, he saw, he glimpsed, he was made aware of her, right? He's looking and he's like, oh. And then the second one where it says like he sends someone is actually the word for seeking. So it's very interesting. Now, hey, when we think about things that we see that may not be appropriate for our eyes visually, or even for our ears to hear or to be a part of, it is one thing to see this in a passing glance. It's one thing to be that put in front of you and you to be aware of it. If someone came running in here naked, you would all be aware of it. Yes? Okay, great. It's another thing to start going and seek this person out and to try to actually see more than just a glimpse or them passing by to be aware of. And so there is definitely this point that's being made that he saw her, but then now I am seeking after her. The same thing is true when you hear gossip at your workplace. That's an easy illustration. And you hear it and you're like, okay, I walk away from him. I'm not going to really be a part of that. That's very different than going and hearing a little bit of gossip and then going next door to the other office and saying like, hey, tell me about what's going on here. And then you get a little information here and then going to the next person. Hey, did you hear about, right? There's a difference. Can we all agree that there's this hearing of this, but now I'm seeking now more of it. This desire for more of it. There's a passage in James that says this: each person is tempted when they're dragged away by their own evil desires and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. I think this is David's downfall. Not only does he see her, but now I am going to seek after her. Verse 4, David sent a message to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Now she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. Then she went back home. The woman conceived and sent word to David, saying, I am pregnant. He sees her, he seeks after her, and then he goes to get her. You see the progression? And this is where sin always starts kind of at this heart level, and then it's our own kind of desire, and then if not held in check, it does then go into sin, into then ultimately death, and we're going to see that. And so he goes and gets her. Again, is she forced into his room, into his bed? It's a great question. It's the king summoning you. Is she complicit in all of this? Willing in all of this? Hey, my husband Uriah's out at war and I'm lonely. Hey, and the warrior king, David's good looking. He's well known. He's got a lot of power and influence. Again, all of that's speculation. And what we're going to see is this is really a story about David. And so it gets me irked a little bit. This is my pet peeve that I've heard so many that makes this about Bathsheba. This isn't about her, right? She's definitely part of the story. I'm not trying to dismiss her, but this is the story about David and his issue. Because what you're going to see is we don't get a condemnation on Bathsheba, we get a condemnation on David moving forward. And so when we look at this, I go, yeah, it's interesting to flesh that out, to think of like the scene and what that could have looked like, and was there a power dynamic? Either way, whether she agreed to it or she didn't agree to it, would we all agree that it's wrong? Can I then make a point that in a culture currently that says our sexual actions, the highest, the ability to tell whether it was right or wrong is always what we say is consent. If it's two consenting adults, then they can do anything they want. Actually, that isn't true. If you just all told me, even if she consented, it doesn't make that morally right. Consent, while very important, is not actually the highest level to whether or not something is morally right or wrong sexually. And so you then have the choice of, okay, what is it? What am I going to make? If you're following Scripture, then it would be, hey, God's design, God's law for sex being the thing that we are going to hold to, not actually just consent. Does that make sense? Are you following along with that? Okay. So we know the writer says pretty in your face, this is not Uriah's kid. She had just been on her period, and so there's no way this is Uriah's. This is David's child. They have an affair, and she sends word that she is now pregnant. And so David, verse 6, so David sent this word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent after him. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the palace with all his master's servants and did not go down to his house. So Uriah's out with battle with Joab, fighting the Ammonites. His wife was home, like most of the wives would have been. After the affair, David is now going, how am I going to cover this up? So he calls Uriah back, and you can see, how is Joab? Hey, yeah, how's my commander doing? Is he doing a good job? How's the battle going? Everything good? You guys have enough food, right? Enough weapons? Are we winning? Like, what's it like? He gets him home, and then he's like, thanks for sharing all of that with me. Hey, maybe here's a bottle of champagne. You should go home and see your wife. We know what he wants. He wants Uriah to go home. Hey, Uriah, sleep with your wife, have sex with your wife. That way, when this child is born, it will look as though it's your child. But instead, it says that Uriah just goes kind of to the outer parts of the palace and sleeps with all the servants. There is, it's really interesting. We miss this. So the word for sex here is to lie down. It also means to go to sleep, right? This is the same way we would use it if we say like, oh, I slept with someone, right? You could mean that, hey, I just slept next to them, or you could mean, hey, I had sex with them. And so when David goes and he slept with Bathsheba, when Uriah comes back, he slept at the gate or at the palace door instead of sleeping with his wife. And so, verse 10, David was told, Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home? Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country, in the wilderness. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife, to lay with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. He goes, this is a very different contrast between David and Uriah. Uriah comes back and he is given leeway for comfort and pleasure and the food and everything else. And instead he goes, yeah, all my brothers are out there in battle. I can't go and like partake in this. This would not be right of me to do this. And so David's kind of plan to cover this up isn't working. And so David in verse 12 now, David said to him, stay here one more day and tomorrow we'll send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. At David's invitation, he ate and drank with him, and David made him drunk. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep on his mat among his master's servants and did not go home. Okay, plan one fails, try again. So This time, let me get him drunk. This will for sure get him to go home and sleep with his wife. And so instead, it says that he doesn't, that he goes, and now it says, how is this translated? It says he goes and he sleeps on his mat. Again, this is the very opposite thing that David did. The same thing that it says that David woke up or got up from his bed, from sometimes it's bed, couch, mat, at the beginning of the chapter. So David gets up. He doesn't sleep with his bed. He sleeps with another man's wife. Uriah, who it is his wife, instead of going and sleeping with her and taking kind of that comfort, because everyone else is out to battle, instead of sleeping with my wife, I'm going to sleep with my bed or on my mat again. It's this really contrast between the two actions. David gets up out of his bed and goes, seeks this. Instead, Uriah goes to bed and doesn't. Well, David finds out about this. This is not went to plan. Again, when we sin, the extent we will go to cover it up it's intense. It's insane, right? This is comical and this story isn't, but when I was homeschooled and then went to high school, but when I was in middle school, I was homeschooled. And the one day, my dad, who kind of did all the math with us, was coming home to check my work. I had not completed it. I'd done something else. I was a very distracted young boy. I was talking to somebody. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? And I'm like, I know where my dad keeps the answer key. So I go up into his closet. I take the answer key out, and I write all, like, the answers down. I even write 2 of them that were wrong. Because I got to cover this up. And I knew that, I justified it with, I know this stuff. I was actually good at math. I know this. It's not a big deal. I didn't have time. I was doing other things. And so then we went through, 1, 2, oh, you got question 4 wrong. Why'd you get 4 wrong? Let's do it. Oh, here it is. Boom, boom, boom. I could do it for him. He's like, okay, great. It worked so well. I was like, hey, tomorrow, I got things to do too. So this went on for like a week, and then 2 weeks, and then 3 weeks, and then 4 weeks, and then all of a sudden, I didn't know where the math was going anymore. Like before, I had known it, but now I'm not learning, and so we're like chapters, like think of a month of math work when you're in 7th grade. I'm like, kind of lost. So now I can't quit. This goes on for months. I finally get caught because the test was wrong. The answer key was wrong. And they had flip-flopped 2 of the chapters. And so because I didn't know it, I'm just copying everything. So then my dad's, and he's like, wait, this is wrong. Then he looks at it, he's like, no, this, and then it all exposed, right? And I'm crying and weeping. And I end up having to do math through the whole summer because I'm now 3-4 months behind. But the level of deceit that you have to keep going to cover your sin just keeps getting greater and greater and greater, right? We have this in our own lives that, hey, sin is going to cause me too much shame. I'm going to be humiliated. I can't handle it. So instead, we do it so often, even worse things to cover up a mistake. So then this is what David does. 14, in the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. He wrote a letter and he sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. Sends him with his own death warrant. 16. So while Joab had the city under siege, he put Uriah at the place where he knew the strongest defenders were. When the men of the city came out and fought against Joab, some of the men in David's army fell. Moreover, Uriah the Hittite died. Joab sent David a full account of the battle. He instructed the messenger, when you have finished giving the king the account of the battle, the king's anger may flare up, and he may ask you, why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you know that they would shoot arrows from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, son of Jerub-Besheth? Didn't a woman drop an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you get so close to the wall? If he asks you this, then say to him, moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. So the battle goes, they're fighting the Ammonites. The Ammonites come out of the fortress. They push them back, but they continue to push them back so close to the wall that now the archers can reach them. They shoot down. Uriah and other soldiers die. As Joab is giving this account, he goes, the king's going to be mad with this. David is a strategist, right? He's a warrior. He would know that that's a terrible tactic to take. In Judges 9, we actually have the story. It's Gideon's son, Abimelech, who goes and captures this city. They all go up into a tower. He's then going to set the tower on fire to burn them down. And it says that a woman drops a millstone out of the window and kills him. And so this is kind of this well-known story in history that, hey, don't get too close to the wall, you're going to die. And so you should have known better. But Joab says, hey, if the king's angry, tell him Uriah has also died. And so this is what the servant does. 22, the messenger sent out, and when he arrived, he told David everything Joab had said to him. The message said to David, the men overpowered us and came out against us in the open, but we drove them back to the entrance of the city gates. Then the archers shot arrows at your servants from the wall, and some of the king's men died. Moreover, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead. David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this upset you. The sword devours one as well as another. Press the attack against the city and destroy it. Say this to encourage Joab. So David commits adultery. Then he goes and gets the husband, Uriah. He tries to get him to go and sleep with his wife. He doesn't, out of honor for his soldiers and what the battle that's going on, and ultimately to God. So David gets him drunk, tries again. That doesn't work. And so now I'm going to have him killed. And so not only, think about this, not only does Uriah die in this cover-up, but all the other men that were close to him. It says that other men die in this whole charade to cover up the sin of David. And then when David's presented with this, he's like, well, swords are sharp, right? Just so callous, and it's such a so different than how we've seen David, right? And then it goes at the end in 26, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So Uriah's wife mourns. After that's over, David brings her to be one of his wives. This could be looked at as very generous from the king. Hey, I'm going to take the widow and take care of her and bring her into my family. Really, this is just all a cover-up. And at the end of the chapter, I think is the most important thing to see. What he's done has displeased the Lord. Again, not what Bathsheba and David has done. This is focused on David and his actions. What he has done is not right. So here's the outcome of this. Chapter 12. The Lord sent Nathan to David. Remember, Nathan is the prophet who had just previously prophesied that David's house will be blessed, that David's lineage will last forever, that there will come one that will always sit on the throne. This is where we get Jesus. The prophesying about Jesus is the one that came from David's line, from the house of Judah. That's why when we sing songs like a roaring lion, because the lion was like the signet for Judah. And this is why then we also will refer, right, when we're talking about this, is Jesus is coming from the line of Judah, from the line of David. Okay, from the tribe of Judah, from the line of David. And so Nathan is the one that had just prophesied this blessing over David, but now he's going to come and bring a word to him. Nathan said, there were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, grew it up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for the lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. This would be common that disputes were brought to the king. Later on, we see this when Solomon is king, David's son. Do you remember the story of the 2 women coming and arguing about whose child had died and whose was still alive? And so there was judgment there. And so this would have probably not been out of the ordinary, but instead Nathan kind of disguises what I'm going to bring before David. Because you remember, David is a guy of justice, right? All of these times we've seen him enact justice on others for what they have done. And so Nathan brings and he says, hey, here's this whole thing, this little lamb. And then the rich man who had lots of sheep and lots of lambs take the one that belongs to someone else and sacrifices it. And so David says he must die and must pay it back. And then Nathan hits him with, you are that man. You're the one. It's really easy to look at other people's sin and judge them, right? Oh, so easy to sit there and go like, I would never do so. That's disgusting. How could they be so weak, or how could they be so selfish? It's hard when you get hit in the face with like, I'm that person. No, that's me. I do that same thing. And so Nathan says, you're the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if this had been too little, I would have given you even more. God saying, I have done all of this for you. I have given this to you. I have done this for you. And if it was too little, I would have done even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword. Notice, David didn't strike him down, right? Technically, David didn't do it. Somebody else did it. But God said, no, you have done this. You are the one that have killed him. You struck Uriah the Hittite down with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. 11, this is what the Lord says. Out of your own household, I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes, I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel. Whew. God says, I have given you all of this, and this is the response I get from you. Like, I've done all of these things for you. Have you ever had someone do that to you, that you feel like you have went above and beyond to bless them, to care for them, to give to them, right? And you give everything you have. And then the person like betrays you, backstabs you, talks bad about you, and you're like, I've done everything for you. This is God, I've done everything for you. And this is what you do? I have made you the greatest king, all of Judah and Israel, all the land. And this is what you do? He says, I'm going to bring calamity on your house. The sword will not leave. And it doesn't. And now we get this it's terrible what happens. His whole life is going to be a mess after this point, just a mess. And he says, you did these things in secret, like things are going to be done to you and they're going to be in broad daylight. You're going to be exposed. Sin has consequences. We all realize that. But do you realize, they are far, I think, more than we often think, the way that they infest other people's lives as well. And you're going to see this, right? Not only from the deaths of others, but his whole, this ripple effect is going to be so big and so broad. And so we often think sin, if I'm really not hurting anyone, it's no big deal. Right? That somehow I can contain it, and yeah, maybe I'll have consequences for it, but nobody else. But that is never true. It is never true that when sin is missing the mark of what God designed, and so when we miss the mark of the way he created and ordered things, of course, then everything that's going to come out of that is going to be missing the mark. This is why, please know, do not believe the lie that sin is I'm the only one that's going to have to bear coming out of this. No, it's far-reaching. It's far-reaching, and it's devastating. And I think if we realize that, especially maybe for parents in the room, when you realize that your sin will affect your children, would I maybe change how I did things? David says to Nathan in 13, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. So David realizes that his sin, while murdering Uriah, having an affair with Bathsheba, all of the other murder and death that happens because we have to try to cover this up, all of this, while this is against people, it is ultimately against God as the creator and designer. And this is where I think we should realize that when we sin, when we treat others like David treated those, that Bathsheba and Uriah and those around him, it is contempt towards God. It's not just the sin against my neighbor. It is sin against God because God is the creator and sustainer of my neighbor. And so David realizes this. He says, I have sinned against the Lord. This is a different perspective than what we see from Saul. Remember when we kind of first talked about Saul, and Saul is constantly giving excuses for his issues. One of the things that comes across in David in his Psalms and in here in 2 Samuel is that David takes ownership for his action. And Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. It literally passed over your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die. I really struggle with this. I wish I could wrap this up really nice for you. This doesn't make sense to me. Why is the son going to be killed for the father's actions? I mean, Ezekiel, if you read Ezekiel 18, there's a huge long chapter on that I will not punish the son for the father's action. If there's a righteous father and he has a wicked son, I'm not going to punish the dad for the wicked son because he made his own choices. And if that wicked son then has a righteous son, I'm not going to punish that son for his father's. And it just keeps going in line with that. And then God says a line like, I take no pleasure even in the death or punishment of wicked people. Like, I don't want to do any of this. And so we see this statement, but then we also now have this child dying on account of David. very challenging. There will be some that will say when the Lord takes away your sin, it means that this isn't a punishment, the son dying, but just kind of a consequence. That's really, I don't know how you parse that out. Because the son dying, it's pretty clear it's on account of these actions. Here's the one way that, maybe two thoughts on how I kind of wrap my mind around it. One, it's a question I asked you earlier in this book. Does God have the right? Does he have the right to make judgments, to show mercy on who he shows mercy to? If the answer is yes, then in confusion, I have to continue to lean on that. I do not get this. This is really challenging. I believe that God, because he created everything, he's good, he knows all things, he has the right to dispense justice as he wills, and that's good. Secondly, physical death does not always mean punishment. And maybe that's too far of a saying because it's a child, but I can think of my grandmother, Busha, because we're Polish, was a couple years ago, passed away. She was not doing well. She had dementia. She was in hospice. It was not good. I come over to see her. The nurses are going, hey, we don't know how much longer. A lot of my aunts are in the room. And my grandparents are Catholic, so then they were like, well, should we get a priest? And then they're like, well, Steve's here. He can just kind of do a prayer. And so they're like, would you pray? And I'm, of course, yes. And so I remember we stood around her, a bunch of aunts, my mom, and we prayed for my grandmother. And I did not pray long life. I did not pray healing. Instead, I prayed and asked God for his mercy. She passed like a half an hour later. And when she passed, it was the mercy of God because she was suffering so much. Could we look at that child's death as a mercy of God towards that child and also a consequence to David? That's really hard to try to do that. But right, like that child would have been brought up as, hey, that's the one conceived in sin and this adultery, all of these things. And so I don't know, but I do know that physical death is not always a punishment, but it is a mercy, even actually for all of us. We live in a broken world, and so a physical death that does not allow us to live forever in a broken world is actually a mercy for all of us. Okay. So, this is what it says. After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had borne to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and spent the nights laying in sackcloth on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. On the seventh day, the child died. David's attendants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they thought, while this child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us when we spoke to him. How can we now tell him that the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized that the child was dead. Is the child dead, he asked. Yes, they replied, he is dead. And so the child dies. David is fasting and praying to God. It says that he's like kind of besides himself, so much so that his servants are afraid when it says like he will do something desperate. They're afraid he's going to kill himself. They're afraid that he's going to kill himself if he knows this child has died. But it's really interesting what is kind of next here. David got up from the ground in 20 after he had washed, put on lotion, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. Then he went to his own house and his request that they serve him food, and he ate. His attendants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now the child is dead and you get up and eat? He answered, while the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me. David asked God, hey, would you change your mind on this? We actually see this in different passages of Scripture that people pray, and because of their intercessing with God, God says, yeah, I will not bring this calamity. We see this in like the story of Abraham when he was going to, Sodom and Gomorrah. We think of, fire and brimstone, but Abraham kept going to God, hey, if there's 50 righteous people, would you save the city? How about 25? How about 10? And eventually he does get some of his family out. And so we see Moses. God goes, the people have turned against me. I'm going to wipe them out. And God says, no, don't do that. Moses says, hey, would you show them mercy? And so David knows this. And so he asks God, hey, would you show mercy? Even though he knows this is what it says. But then once the child dies, he realizes the child's not coming back. So he gets up and he eats, puts on clothes and lotion. And that last part I'll just point out is one of the passages. There's a few others that talks about like the age of innocence. And I can't tell you like, hey, it's 4 years old. And at 4 years old, if your child dies before 4, then they're like going to heaven. But there are passages that talk about why we are treated fair. We are not all treated the same. And here, David is making the reference that this child is not coming back, but I am going to go see this child because this child is with God. And so it's one of the things that goes like, going back to the mercy of the child's death, ultimately being with God is amazing. It is better than this world, even though I don't really understand that right now. And so this child is actually in a better place. We end here in 24. It says, then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her again. To her, she gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him, and because the Lord loved him, he sent word through Nathan the prophet to name him Jedediah, meaning beloved by God. And so their first son dies. We don't even have a name for him. And then what comes along out of this relationship, though, is Solomon, who is going to be next in line as king, and to continue the promise God has made to him, even out of this very broken and messy relationship of how it started. The chapter ends with that Joab goes and he fights at Rabbah with the Ammonites, and he captures kind of the royal city, and that kind of like bookends, right? Joab went out to war, and then we get this whole narrative, and now Joab kind of finishes, and we won't go into that too much. Janae, Mason, if you want to come up here as we close. I hope as I sit with this, here's what I take out of it. Here's hopefully maybe some encouragement for you. Maybe not encouragement, maybe warning. Warning's the better one. If I am not careful, I am not that far off from David, right? And when life is going good, it is very easy to forget God and to go down paths that are unhealthy, unwise, not moral, right? Because I'm going from a glance. I'm going to go seek this. I'm going to go get this. And before you know, the desires of my heart have turned into sin, and that sin has ultimately turned into death. And so the passage like this should be humbling to us, that if David, a man after God's own heart, could fall in this way, like we need to be so careful about the situations we put ourselves in, the things we look at, knowing that sin has real consequences that are far stretching. If you have maybe had family that there's family brokenness in there, my family has a lot of brokenness, and choices that people make impact you, and that's hard to deal with. But then my choices impact others as well. And so as much as I can, I want to align myself to God the way he has ordered and created the world, following under his kingship, his lordship, because when I do that, It's not that life will be perfect, but it will be as he designed. And some of these terrible things that come after it wouldn't continue. And then lastly, the whole point of Solomon, if you know, like Solomon comes a great king, continues the lineage of David. And so even out of that like just messy, really relationship, out of the mess of Bathsheba and David, God still chooses to be faithful. There's a great passage that says, right, like if we are unfaithful, is God going to be unfaithful? By no means. God is always faithful. And so we should look at David, learn to confess our sin to him, not hide it, trusting that God can forgive us our sin, even when it is at such deep, deep levels like we see this morning. So would you stand, and we're going to close with song this morning.
Draw me close to you. Never let me go. I lay it all down again to hear you say that I'm your friend. You are my desire. No one else will do. 'Cause nothing else could take your place. To feel the warmth of your embrace. Help me find a way. Lead me back to you. You're all I want. You're all I've ever needed. You're all I want. Help me know you are near. Draw me close to you. Never let me go. Lay it all down again to hear you say that I'm your friend. You are my desire. No one else will do. 'Cause nothing else could take your place. To feel the warmth of your embrace. Help me find the way. Lead me back to you. You're all I want. You're all I've ever needed. Nothing else could take your place. To feel the warmth of your embrace. Help me find the way. Lead me back to you.
Let me end by reading out of Psalm 32, written by David. Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sins the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of the summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. Therefore, let all the faithful pray to you while you may be found. Surely the rising of the mighty waters will not reach them. You are my hiding place. You will protect me from trouble and surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my loving eyes on you. Do not be like the horse or the mule, which have no understanding, but must be controlled by bit and bridle, or they will not come to you. Many are the woes of the wicked, but the Lord's unfailing love surrounds the one who trusts him. Rejoice in the Lord and be glad, you righteous. Sing, all you who are upright in heart. God, we bring that before you today. We thank you for the words you give us. Would you challenge us, convict us? It says that your Holy Spirit does that, so I pray that through your Spirit, that you would convict us of areas of sin and maybe areas we've been hiding and trying to cover. Would we confess that to you? Would we bring that before you? And ultimately, we believe that you are faithful to forgive us our sins through Jesus, and so we thank you that you cover us, that you have paid the penalty of sin, which is death, for us. And so we trust in that, even as we still continue making mistakes. Would you direct us and guide us this week? In your name, amen. Have a great week.